Tell me a little bit about yourself. What brings you here?
My name is Veine. I'm studying at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology. It's a mixed program, high school teacher and engineer.
Okay.
And my topics are mostly physics and math and pedagogy.
My name is Natalie Jellinek. I work as an educational developer at the Unit for Teaching and Learning at Karolinska Institutet. We've worked quite a lot now in the past few years on integrating the SDGs into the curriculum. So really thinking about what does it mean to teach towards Agenda 2030? What does it mean not only to look at my research and like what I actually publish about, but also to look at how I teach and what I teach, and thinking about, well, what are the competencies that our students, and this is where you maybe have done a lot of work, right? Yeah. So what are the skills that we want our students to be trained in, the competencies, the attitudes, and by default, what are the skills and attitudes that their teachers will need in order to train them?
These international students that come to our universities, especially from my experience at KTH, they're very, very keen on doing something sustainable, and they have a lot of experiences from their own home countries who are maybe hit harder than Sweden in climate issues. Yeah. Do you see any way in education to mix these first year students who are kind of Swedish perspective, don't really know what's going on, to meet these international students when they're coming in?
We need to think about how to create meeting spaces and meaningful conversations between the different people who are at our campuses, right? So we cannot think that because we have a group of international students who interact in a classroom that they by osmosis kind of practice intercultural skills. So that is one of the things that we really discuss with our teachers, is really how to build meaningful, really thought out, plan it out. How will I prepare my students for these encounters? And also, how will I allow them space to kind of practice these skills and not fail necessarily, but like deal with conflicts? Because as you and I talked about before, like conflicts exist, right? And we maybe need to bring them into the classroom and have students explore, well, how do you deal with this? What happens when you have a diversity of perspectives? So definitely meetings, finding space for these dialogues and these conversations, I think, is really key.
Yeah. Nowadays, it's more of conflict. There's so many conflicts of interest. So in order to take action at all, to have this type of action competence, you need to be able to have these tough conversations and also understand different perspectives. So I think this is, if students need to learn more about how they can take action in sustainable development and climate issues, I think meeting people with different perspectives like this is super important. Yeah. And also, a lot of the time can be a new understanding of the issues that they're always bigger than you think. I feel like every time I learn something new, it's like, oh, this is also an issue. Yeah. And it gives a sense of urgency that we need right now as well. Yeah.
I think it's difficult sometimes not to feel sad, right? And to think about like, well, how can I, as an individual, have any type of impact on these massive problems? Like, I'm only this small little person in the universe. What can I possibly do to have an impact? But I think it's important for us to kind of empower our students, and we've seen what young people, I also consider myself young, but like younger people are able to do when we look at all these social movements that we've seen in the past years, whether it be Black Lives Matter or the Me Too movement, Fridays for Future, all these things that are coming like from, they're not top down, but they're really coming from young people.
In my education, I get a lot of perspectives on like ideas for school. Yeah. And one of the ones that I think is really interesting and important is that there's this separation of school and society in a lot of ideas. But there are also ideas about how school and society can interact more. And students don't have to go through school in order to become citizens. Okay. They are citizens. And making them aware of this and the power that you have as a citizen, combining that with what you learn in school, I think that's the way I want to go in my work.
Some of us come to university already feeling empowered for whatever reason, and some of us might come to university feeling disenfranchised and not really feeling like we have an opportunity to make change, right? And some of us have more privilege and some of us has less privilege, and that might impact how how engaged I might be, how much I might feel like I live in a democracy, how much of a citizen I might feel, whether that is questioned about me, whether I feel like I belong, whether I don't belong. So I think that's also part of our assignment as teachers. And I think in my case as teacher trainer, is to really try to get our teachers to think about, well, how do you bring all of these people together, and how do you teach in a way that is sustainable? Because we really need everyone, right? We really need all of these people to work together with their differences, with their different backgrounds and ways of seeing the world and perspectives, to really come together. Because I also think in order for you to think about, well, for example, what are the norms in my classroom? How do I teach? Like, what are the kind of examples that I bring in? How does the way that I address people or the way that I dress, how does that impact the way that my classroom is perceived? I think in order for you to do that, you have to first be able to think about yourself and do some kind of self-reflection and kind of, be ready to like go a bit deeper and become aware of maybe your biases, maybe the way in which you were brought up, maybe how your academic culture and the system that you went through has shaped you, maybe the places in which you might have more or less privilege. Like, you need to really situate yourself in order to then think about, well, how do I engage with others? And how can I engage with others in a meaningful, respectful way and in an open way? Because, I mean, we really think of this as a journey. Like, and it's hard. It's definitely hard to have these conversations, to bring them into the classroom. And we can't expect people to just be able to have them. We need to really prepare them, kind of accompany them in the process, and maybe also figure out how did it go? What did we learn as an organization about having these difficult conversations? Because maybe we shouldn't only have them in the classroom. Maybe we should also have them at our meetings, and maybe we should think about who gets to sit in which meetings and who gets to, who gets to read our policies if they're only in Swedish, and, who gets to participate, who gets to have a voice, who gets a raise, who gets to be a professor, all of these things in order for us to have more sustainable organizations. And I think, interestingly enough, even the whole idea of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, that can also be questioned and criticized. And we can think about, like, well, who gets to decide, what does this mean at the local level? What happens when you have some goals, some countries that advance in some goals, and maybe impact other countries, and that make them kind of go back in other goals? How do we prioritize? Who gets a vaccine and why? So I think several times, actually, I've had teachers come up to me and say, well, I also want to talk about, well, what about these goals? What do you think about them? And I think, great. I think you should. We don't need to just kind of swallow the pill. I think we need to have these conversations and talk about, do they make sense? Who decided? Who is engaged? Who are the stakeholders? I think we have like a common vision that we agree, but we can break it down and really deconstruct what it means in reality. And I think we all learn from that.
When I look at my high school job, where I'm going to work in a high school, I feel like it's not too early for students to feel like there's something they can do already. Because during, everyone who's living through this crisis now is going to have to learn every year something new. How do we do this different? How do I change this behavior? How can we as an organization make this in a better way? So it's going to be continuous learning, and starting learning how to change as a person, as an association, as a group, as a municipality or anything like that. We're going to have to change every year. So I think the more opportunity we have to try, and especially in university when you're allowed to fail as well.
Yeah, exactly.
To try and eventually succeed and become more competent, have this ability to sustain the sustainability.
Yeah. And I think I want to kind of piggyback on this idea of learning, because I always tend to think that we can also unlearn, right? Just as much as we can learn things and get new perspectives, we can also unlearn and relearn and reframe and challenge things that we thought were truths. I mean, and that I think is really eye-opening and kind of gives you another freedom, because you can think like, well, I don't need to be that way. I can be in a whole, I can have a whole other set of skills, abilities, and tools and ways of doing things. And that is great. You don't need to be stuck in this box that you thought was you. And I think that we don't often think about that. No. So I tend to bring that up when we talk about like bias, for example. You can kind of retrain your brain and open it up, and you can change.